the things we're going to do on Shavuos is read the Book of Ruth. So I propose we take a look at some elements in that book. In the blue books, it's on 1269.
Is it a mitzvah to listen to the Megillah? I mean, is there a requirement?
It's a custom. The custom, but it's a universal custom throughout the whole of Jewish people.
Yeah.
That the book should be read. Now, different people do it in different ways. Some people actually take a parchment and have somebody read it, without vowels and without punctuation marks. Right, that's right. Some people have one person read it from a book like this, or from a whole printed Bible, Tanakh, and some people just read it to themselves. But it is it's an unavoidable custom that, because the whole of the Jewish people has done it for 2,000 years at least. That it's not something that could be. It's not optional.
Is there a specific reason why the Book of Ruth now?
Yeah, why the Book of Ruth now? One reason is this. I'm glad you asked, because it's not exactly obvious on the surface. The Book of Ruth concerns Ruth, who became a convert and became a very famous convert because she was the great grandmother of King David and a line of the Messiah. Now, we are celebrating on Shavuos the receiving of the Torah at Sinai. Receiving of the Torah at Sinai was a process of mass conversion. It was the whole of the Jewish people going through a conversion process to accept the Torah. That means, in a certain sense, the whole of the Jewish people are converts. That's one of the reasons why Judaism is so friendly to converts. Abraham got the title as the father of all nations, the father of the converts, because we trace all of our original attachment to Judaism to adults who chose to make that transition. So, since the giving of the Torah is an act of conversion, we're reading one of the books of the Bible that talks about a dramatic case of conversion, what it entails. Now, I'm going to pick out just certain details. As usual, in books like these, which are at least inspired by God, the details cover depths. This one I just discovered a week ago. And it happened in the days when the judges judged. Okay, you could read it that way in the Hebrew. Vayehi bimei shvot hashoftim. Of course, since what judges do is judge, if you had just written in the days of the judges, I think it would have been clear enough. The Midrash comments the other way, the day in which others were judging the judges. Shvot HaShoftim, Shoftim becomes the object of Shvot, not the subject of Shvot. Who was judging the judges? The generation. They were sitting around and judging their leaders, judging their authorities. That's not good. In our tradition, that's not good. That there was a famine in the land. So the natural thought, and the thought that I've had for decades up until last week, is that, okay, you're failing, and when you fail, sometimes God punishes you. Well, the famine is the result of their failure. I saw a reference to a midrash, I didn't see it in the original, which says, no. When do people sit around and evaluate their leaders and authorities and have opinions and discuss it and decide to judge them? When they have leisure, when they have surplus, when things are going well, and, over the midday coffee, the coffee break, coffee and croissant, buns, as they say. Oh, yeah, he's a bum, and he didn't know what he's doing, and so on and so on. Okay, God says, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to save you from that failure by making you worry where supper's coming from. If you don't know what you're going to eat for supper, you're not going to sit around and judge your judges. So what looks like a punishment actually is a strategy of kindness. Now, this is a move that a Jew has to learn to make. Justice is definitely a factor. God does use justice in dealing with the world. But ultimately, all of justice has to express loving kindness, because loving kindness is the single, sole, only purpose for all of creation. So you may see an exercise of justice And that's enough to explain that God is behind it. But ultimately, there has to be a deeper explanation. They have to be able to see eventually how that exercise of justice served the purpose of loving kindness. And here, the Midrash is making it open and plain for us. The purpose of the famine was to stop them from doing it, not to punish them for doing it, but to stop them from doing it by not giving them the opportunity so they would not continue to make this mistake. Okay? Now, there was a famine in the land. A man went from Bethlehem to Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab. He, his wife, and his 2 sons. Now, here you have to know something. Maybe in a history book, we just tell the events in order. A happened, B happened, and C happened. Our stories are not like that. What's the purpose of making reference to the famine? Who cares whether there was a famine or not? Here it's causative. The people were judging their judges, and the result of that was a famine, and the result of the famine was that he went to Moab. Now, how was it that the famine pushed him to Moab? So here the Midrash tells a bitter tale. The man was quite wealthy, and in times of social distress, like a famine, it's expected that the wealthy will extend themselves to help those in need, and he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to share his wealth with the general population who were in need, and he left to protect his wealth. And that then leads to the next sequence of events. Again, it's not just A, B, C, D, but each one leads to the next. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, 2 sons were named Machlon and Kilion. And I must tell you, the meaning of the names here is pretty bitter. Machlon comes from a word which means sickness, and Kilion, which comes from a word which means absolute destruction. How they got named that way, what the names were originally intended to signify, I don't know. Ephraimites, Bethlehem, Judah. They came to the land of Moab, there they remained. Elimelech, his husband, died. Bang. Number 1. She was left with the 2 sons. They married Moabite women. One was named Orpah, one was named Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. The 2 of them, Machlon and Kilion, also died. And the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. And in that time, her 2 sons had no children by those 2 Moabite women. So it's just devastation. The family is left without any descendants. It's just devastation. Now, the Midrash tells us that they were very special, these 2 women. They were princesses of Moab. They were sisters, both daughters of the king. Of course, those days, to be both daughters of the king doesn't mean you're too closely related. The king usually had 10 wives, or 20 wives, or 30 wives, or 40 wives, or 50 wives. So there were lots and lots and lots of princes and princesses running around. But still, they came from the royal family. Now, they married into this Jewish family. Well, the Jewish nation was very highly respected at that time. And this man and his family were very wealthy. So they married in. Maybe that's not too shocking and surprising. Now, the father has died. The 2 sons have died. There's nothing left of the wealth. What are they going to do now? She then rose on the door to return. She said, okay. Because she heard that Hashem remembered his people by giving them food, the famine is over. She left the place where she had been, accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, and they set out on the road to return to the land of Judah. Now, look at the sequence here. She then arose along with the daughters-in-law to return. 7, she left the place where she had been. Now you tell me, can you return without leaving the place where you are? Surely not. You can't stay where you are and also return to someplace else. Once you have 6 on board, what's the point of 7? And we have an exact parallel in the Torah. I'm mentioning both of them because Rashi mentions both of them, and that's going to be our question. Now take a look at 143, verse 5 in the middle of the page. Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went toward Padan Aram. Verse 7, towards the bottom of the page, Jacob obeyed his father and mother and went toward Padan Aram. On the next page it says, Jacob departed from Beersheba and went towards Haran. Now if he's already on the road to Padan Aram, he must have left Beersheba. So why does it say on 145 that he left Beersheba? So Rashi makes the same comment twice, and he cross-references them. This is to teach you, the statement that they left is extra. This is to teach you that when a great person leaves a place, it makes an impact on the place. It's not the same place anymore. We don't have that concept. We have that concept about buildings, or rivers, or mountains. If the Louvre in Paris would burn down, people who have been there would say it's not the same Paris. The Louvre? The Arc de Triomphe. The Eiffel Tower. Those things fell down. You know, if the Congress building in Washington was utterly destroyed and replaced by a flower garden, so people say, well, that's not the same Washington. People say about New York that when the Twin Towers went down, it's just not the same New York. The Torah's attitude is that about people, not about buildings. You know, if the Hudson River dried up, New York wouldn't be the same. We feel that way about people. When a person leaves a city, it's not the same. When a great person leaves a city, its glory and its shine and its greatness and its value is utterly reduced. So that's what it tells us with respect to Jacob, and that's what it tells us over here with respect to Naomi. The question now becomes, why tell me twice? Why tell me twice? And the answer to that question, in logic, has to be, you're asking, why do I have both of A and B? The answer has to come like this. Well, if I had only A, I wouldn't have known B. And if I had only B, I wouldn't have known A. That's why I need both of them. To show why you need both, you need to present two theses. A alone wouldn't give me B, and B alone wouldn't give me A. That's how you test that you need both. Okay, so now let's try it out. Let's see why from neither one could you learn the other one. If I knew that Jacob's leaving Beersheba made an impact, changed the place, reduced the status of the place, would I be able to learn from that when Naomi leaves Moab, it reduced the place, changed the place, reduced the status of the place? Maybe not. Maybe Jacob's leaving is special because he's the third patriarch. He's someone extraordinarily special. One of the greatest Jews who ever lived. You talk about the top 10, Jacob's definitely a top 10. Naomi isn't in the top 10. So maybe only a very, very great Jew leaving a place makes an impact. Someone smaller, like Naomi, doesn't make an impact. So from Jacob, I wouldn't have been able to conclude that Naomi's leaving would make an impact. Okay? Now let's try it backwards. And now, given what I just said, it looks like it's going to be very hard. If I'd been told that Naomi leaving Moab made an impact, reduced the place, wouldn't I have been able to conclude if Naomi, who isn't one of the patriarchs, isn't one of the top 10, her leaving has an impact on the place, then certainly Jacob would have an impact on the place. But that's not true because in the case of Jacob, he left his parents behind there. Isaac and Rebekah were still there. So in Jacob's case, it's a question of going from 3 to 2. In Naomi's case, it's a question of going from 1 to 0. I'll give you an analogy. Imagine a room that's sealed against light. No light gets in. Now here are two scenarios. One scenario is we have 3 candles burning, and somebody puts out one of the candles. That's a reduction in the light. Compare that with, in that very same room, having 1 candle burning and putting it out. Which is going to make the bigger impact? Obviously, 1 to 0 is a much bigger impact than 3 to 2. 1 to 0 means you end up with no light at all. 3 to 2 just means you lost a third of the light. So maybe Jacob's leaving won't have an impact because he left behind his parents. Yeah. So that's why you have to be told both of these things. And this now just gives expression to a Jewish orientation. You're going to a place, who's there? Who's worthwhile seeing here? I wouldn't say that the museums and the rivers and the mountains go to Montreal. They have to go to the mountain because that's the whole city's name for the mountain. But the key value of a place is the people who live in it, and that's something which is expressed here. Are we together? Yeah, it's clear? Okay, good. Then Naomi said, go back. I give you a blessing that Hashem should deal kindly with you the way you did with me, the way you did with the dead and with me. Have a life. They said, no, we'll go with you. And Naomi speaks to them again. And Orpah kisses her mother-in-law and goes back. And Ruth says, no.
Why did she wait until they were on the road to send them back? Why not before they left stay there?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I think there is a psychological strategy here. A person wants to express something. If you cut them off and don't allow them to express it at all, you're going to create tremendous frustration, and then the person may exert force to express and go so far that he can't back down. Here, Naomi can say, you followed me. I know you're faithful to me. I know that I appreciate the fact that you're willing to make this gesture, but I think it's better. You're better off, and that way you reduce the pressure. So, and Orpah takes it. Ruth says no. And she says some of the most beautiful words written anywhere. In the Hebrew, it's gorgeous. Do not urge me to leave you. 16, bottom of the page. And not follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I shall die, and there I shall be buried. Thus may Hashem do to me and more, if anything but death separates me from you. Now, she's leaving the royal house to come back to Israel to be a beggar. A beggar. And that's really, talk about commitment. When she saw she was determined to go, she stopped arguing with her, and the two of them went on until came to Bethlehem. Came to pass, when they arrived in Bethlehem, the entire city was tumultuous over them. These are the famous people who went away, and the rich people, and so forth and so on. And the women said, could this be Naomi? And she answered, don't call me Naomi, the pleasant one. Call me Mara, the embittered one. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I was full when I went away, husband, 2 children, wealthy, respected. Hashem has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi? Hashem has testified against me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, I think we have to analyze Naomi's expression here and her position here with a little bit of care. She's not complaining against God. She's not complaining against God. She doesn't say it was unfair, unjust, I didn't deserve it, I was innocent. She doesn't say that. She just says, God punished me very strongly, and I can't be called kind, I can't be called pleasant, because I'm not pleasant and my life isn't pleasant. Question is whether even that isn't, to some degree, inappropriate. It's going a little too far. I'll show you a passage which expresses this very idea. Look at page, very good, 265. One piece of background information. Isaac died at age, anybody know? 180. Abraham died at age 175. And oral tradition says he was taken 5 years early, should have been 180. But because Esau was on the verge of going out, Abraham shouldn't see that because he was promised to die satisfied. And if he had to see one of his grandchildren become corrupt, he wouldn't have died satisfied. So he died at 175. But the norm is 180. Okay? Now, Jacob dies at 147. So that's a difference of
43.
33. 33. Right? It is a 33. Okay, now, that's just background. Now, when Jacob comes down to Egypt, Joseph presents his father to Pharaoh. Top of the page, Pharaoh speaks to Jacob. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of your life?" Jacob answered Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourns have been 130 years. Few and bad have been the days of the years of my life. They have not reached the lifespans of my forefathers in the days of their sojourns." Thus Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left Pharaoh's presence. That's his speech. That sounds pretty bitter. He's not accusing God of injustice, not saying he didn't deserve it, but he's saying, my life has been bitter. Okay? Now, if you take a look in the Hebrew, the second line, beginning of the second line, that's Jacob's speech. Count the words in Jacob's speech. It's 2.5 lines. Starting the beginning of the second line, count to the next 2 dots. But in the Hebrew, not in the English. 25. Okay. Well, now, how about, that's his bitter statement, right? How about the number of words that describes Pharaoh's question? The previous line, starting from the second word, Vayomer Paro. 8. 25 and 8 is? 33. Those are the 33 years that Jacob lost. He lost 33 years. Should have been 180. Dies 147. Missing 33 years. It's these 33. And the lesson is, he's responsible for the question also. What prompted Pharaoh's question? Because he looked terrible. He looked terrible. So Pharaoh says, "How old are you?" So he's responsible not only for the bitterness in his answer, but in the bitterness of his appearance. So this is an indication that expressing yourself this way is too much. It's too much. Even if it isn't a complaint against God, it's too much. I have one of my children, whenever I ask him how he is, he always says, Baruch Hashem, gewaldig. Gewaldig means terrific. Okay, I know he has ups and downs. I know sometimes he's under pressure, but he's very conscious of this. I'm not going to give the impression that anything's wrong. A person can ask for help. Things could be better, but things aren't bad. So Naomi's statement here has to be taken with a double aspect. On the one hand, she deserves credit for accepting God's treatment of her, not rebelling against it, not complaining against it, but there is an element of bitterness that's too strong. Okay, so now they start. What do beggars do? If you're in an agricultural society, the Torah has laws that certain parts of the crop have to be left to the poor. And you have poor people trailing the reapers, and they know the rules, to pick up those parts that are left for the poor. And in any field, there's a big field and a good crop, you'll have a number of people. Somehow they have to accommodate one another. They mustn't compete with one another. They mustn't fight with one another. And Naomi's old, but Ruth is young, and she goes out with the people who are gleaning the parts that are appropriate for the poor. Now, there is someone in the local population who's a relative. In fact, he's a first cousin. Naomi doesn't say anything about that to Ruth. And she ends up in, his name is Boaz. She ends up in Boaz's field. She's new. Usually the people had their normal places of gleaning, of picking up the spare grain. So he says to one of his servants, "Who is that? Who's that young woman?" And he says, "She's a Moabite girl," meaning she came back from Moab and her ancestry is Moab. Returned with Nomi. And she said, "Please let me join them. I'm new. Please let me join the ones who are taking food." And she's been here working. So Boaz addresses her. "Hear me well, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Don't leave here, but stay close to my maidens. Keep your eyes on the field which they have harvesting and follow them. I've ordered the young men not to molest you," meaning there were guards to make sure that they didn't take what was not appropriate for them, and so the molest in English has connotations that in Hebrew it doesn't have. So they shouldn't touch you. They shouldn't interfere with you. And when you're thirsty, go to the drugs and drink what the young men have drawn, which you would be required to do for poor people. Let them bring their own drink. But I'm giving you a special favor. And she's filled with gratitude. "Why have you singled me out? I'm a foreigner." And he said to her, "I've learned all that you've done. I learned that you stayed with your mother-in-law and came back. And you left your father and mother, the land of your birth, to come to a people you've never known before. Hashem should reward your actions. You came to seek refuge under Hashem's protection." That's the reference to wings here. It really means the end of the garment. Protection. You've become a convert. And you've gone from royalty to begging. And she expresses her gratitude. And then at mealtime, he says to her, "Come over and partake of the bread. Dip your morsel in vinegar." I must tell you, this book, I don't know why they translate the word pas as morsel. I don't know about their English. In my English, morsel is a crumb. She didn't take a crumb. Pas is like pas today. Pas means a piece of bread. It is that you can have some of the food that is set aside for my workers, and you can dip it in the vinegar and make it tasty. And she sat beside the workers, and he handed her good grain. She had some left over, and she gets up to take grain, and he says to the young men who are making sure that everybody does the right thing, "Let her even go among the sheaves that don't belong to the poor. Where the harvesters are harvesting, let her do that also." He's giving her tremendous advantages, tremendous favors. Comes home to her mother-in-law, 19, shows her what she got. Mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? May the one that took such generous notice of you be blessed." She told her mother-in-law, the name of the man by whom I work today is Boaz. The words in the Hebrew are a little more subtle. Shema isha sisi imo hayom Boaz. The man with whom I did today, the name is Boaz. That can mean in Hebrew that I worked, I did something to him or for him. To him or for him. The Midrash jumps on her words. What did you do for him? What did you do for him? He showed you such favor. He gave you leftovers of his lunch. He let you glean among the sheaves where even the poor can't go. What did you do for him? And the Midrash quotes her as saying, "You know what I did for him? I gave him the opportunity to favor me. I gave him the opportunity to give to me." This Midrash, in this spot, contains an extremely profound Jewish lesson. I don't know if other cultures would agree with it, but it's a Jewish lesson. Now let me give you some background. The famous story of Abraham welcoming in the travelers, and when he offers them hospitality, he says, "Ve'ekcha pas lechem," same pas. Literally in Hebrew, ve'ekcha means I will take a chunk of bread. That's not what he means. He means he's going to give it to them. Why does he say, I'll take? He should have said, Ve'etna paslachem, not Ve'ekcha paslachem. When God asks for contributions to build the tabernacle, he says, V'yikhu li truma, take for me a contribution. Take? Then he has to contribute. Contribute means give. As you'll find out when you have money, and there are people who want your money. Should have said v'yitnu li truma, not v'yikhu li truma. The lesson there is this. Every physical item has in it two dimensions. It has in it the physical dimension and the spiritual dimension. The physical dimension is what it is physically, and the spiritual dimension is the mitzvah that you can do with it. Now Abraham says to the travelers, I'm offering you hospitality. I'm going to give you bread. But I'm not deluding myself. I'm not fooling myself. This chunk of bread has two dimensions, the physical dimension and the spiritual dimension. When I give you the physical bread, I'm creating for myself the spiritual dimension by doing the mitzvah of hospitality with it. And I know that the spiritual dimension is worth much more than the physical dimension. And therefore, I regard myself here as a taker, not as a giver, but a taker. By handing over the bread to you, I get the big benefit. And I'm acknowledging that. Same thing God says in contributions for the tabernacle. Yes, you should offer your gold and your silver and your tapestries and your precious gems and all the rest. Don't think you're losing out. This is like an investment. You're going to get the divine presence among you. That's worth infinitely more than anything material. So when you hand over your contributions to the tabernacle, you're really taking, not giving. That's a classical Jewish teaching from the Chumash. Now we come to Ruth, who takes it another step further. Ruth says, okay, what did Boaz do? Boaz did me favor. He showed me favoritism by enabling me to have more of his material than otherwise. His gesture was to benefit me with more materiality. Let's divide it up. When he does that, I get the bread, I get the sheaves of barley, and he gets the mitzvah. So who's getting the bigger return here? He is. Just like Abraham gets the bigger return, just like we get the bigger return when we contribute to the tabernacle, he's getting the bigger return. Now, I provided him with the opportunity to get that bigger return. Isn't it I who am giving to him? By being willing to receive the charitable material that he hands to me, I'm making a bigger gift to him. I'm really the giver here. Look how hard I had to work. Look how long I had to work, says the Midrash in Ruth's name, to give him the opportunity to provide me with these things from which he's getting the benefit of the mitzvah, which is the spirituality in these items. The Talmud expresses this idea with a famous saying, dictum: more than the householder does with the beggar does with the householder. The picture of the beggar's coming to the door of the householder, knocks on the door, asks him for charity, and the householder gives him the charity. Who's doing more for the other? The beggar is doing more for the householder than vice versa, because the beggar gets money and the householder gets the mitzvah of charity. And by the way, in the city of Jerusalem, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, when someone asked for charity, he would say, Zechei bi, earn merit through me. And sensitive people, to this very day, when someone asks for charity, say to them, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And indeed, I saw a source which said that some people don't want to take charity for whatever reason. And there are discussions whether it's right or wrong, but they don't want to take charity except for 10 days during the year, for Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, because they say, we have no right, because we don't want to take charity, to deny other Jews the merit of giving charity when they're being judged. We have no right to do that. So during those 10 days, we have to be prepared to take charity. That's what's hidden in this verse and in the Midrash on this verse that we learn from the Book of Ruth, this exquisite idea that Giving someone the opportunity to do charity to you is providing him with a gift far bigger than what he gives you. Okay? That's Ruth's message here. So now, Naomi is confronted with this. Ruth went out to glean in the fields, given no instruction, no geography lesson. She happens on the field of Boaz, and he happens to take notice of her, and he happens to favor her in this way. Those are not happenings. Those are not happenings. That's obviously divine providence. So Naomi understands that and gives immediate expression to that. Verse 20. Blessed be he of Hashem, for not failing in his kindness to the living of the dead. The man is closely related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen. And Ruth then says to Naomi, and he told me, not only did he favor me today, but he said, stay in my field. Don't go away anywhere else. And she said, Naomi says, terrific. Do that. You stay there. Don't budge from his field, and don't be found anywhere else. And stayed there the whole time. Now, I'll just give a little background, and then tomorrow we'll go into this in detail. There are two parallel laws here, well, sort of parallel. When the Jewish people took possession of the land of Israel, it was divided up geographically. Tribes got portions, families got portions, individuals got portions. That becomes the ancestral portion of land. The normal procedure is that you have your land, you work your land, you can rent it, you can sharecrop it, you might even sell it, but all sales are only until the Jubilee. And the Jubilee, the land reverts to its original owners, or the inheritors of the original owners. No sales are permanent. That's expressed by the Torah saying, you don't own the land, I own the land. And I'm telling you, you're sort of like just renting it, so on and so on. And if you give it away at the Jubilee, everything is canceled. Now, there are exceptions, but this is the norm. The norm is that it goes back. Furthermore, if a person does sell his land, it's a mitzvah to take it back. Under most conditions, if you sell your land, you can require it back. So, you sell your land 25 years before the Jubilee, so that's considered you sold it for 25 years, because in 25 years it's coming back anyway. And you received a certain price for it. If at any time you want to refund the amount of money that's appropriate for the remaining years, you can get it back. And if you don't want to do that, one of your relatives can do that. He can redeem it in your name, take it back, because the norm is that the land should be in the hands of the ancestral owners. In the Jubilee, it's forced back. In the meantime, it can be taken back by a redeemer. There's a list of relatives who are redeemers, and first cousin is one of them. Not the top of the list, but as you go down the list, eventually, the first cousin is a redeemer. So, Naomi's first remark is that Boaz is related to the fields we used to have. We had fields. We were a wealthy family. And he then has a connection to our circumstances. We'll have to work it out, we'll have to arrange it, but he has a connection to our circumstances. That's one. And the second is the mitzvah of Yibum. If a man dies without children, so then, other things being equal, if he has a brother, it's a mitzvah for the brother to marry the widow so as to try to provide children. We'll talk about that tomorrow in some detail. And Ruth is saying, Naomi is saying to Ruth, we'll have to do this in detail tomorrow. I'm just telling you that. But Boaz is a relative, and because he's a relative, this idea of picking up the loose ends, picking up the widow of a man who died without children, as your husband, Machlon, died without children, that too is a loose end here, which perhaps Boaz could effect. So the fact that you were guided by divine providence to his field, and he took notice of you, and he said, stay here with my gleaners and don't be found anyplace else, that may be the key to our salvation. That's what Naomi is telling Ruth here. Okay?
Can I ask, in 21, why does it reaffirm that she's a Moabite?
Yeah, it's all the way throughout the story. It's all the way throughout the story. I think the
It's not,
point.
it's not the whole way through. Like
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah, it's came out. Yeah, it's very consistent. I think the point here is that you might have expected her to have strikes against her. There were wars between Israel and Moab. When they came out of Egypt, Moab treated us very badly, and we have laws against them for that reason. And the exquisite care that she gets is, again, a testimony of the text to how the Jewish people looks upon righteous converts. Even if she comes from a nation which you might have terrible feelings about, still, if she's a wonderful person on her own, this is how she's accepted.